welcome to another episode of Inflection. I am Brian Berletic. Joining me, as always, is Angelo Giuliano. Angelo is joining us from Venezuela. How are things? Very briefly, because we'll probably do a whole episode on Venezuela. But how are things there, Angelo?
It's very depressing. I used to live in Venezuela 20 years ago, so I experienced the beginning of Chavez in 1999. He was elected in 1997, but there was already the meddling back then, and so I followed the whole time, and I'm coming back after 20 years, so I can see the difference. So I'd be glad, maybe we can plan a different episode, and I'll give you more information.
And of course, for people who don't know, Venezuela is under heavy pressure. I mean, it's all but warfare against Venezuela, really, by the United States, which has been engaged in regime change operations against Venezuela since Chavez came into power. And so what we talk about almost every week is about the U.S. and how it is causing chaos and mayhem all around the globe. So you're in South America now. And even in South America, I mean, this should be no surprise, but yet it's in America's backyard. Of course, they will take the brunt of U.S. destabilization. But let's do some news items. Let's go around the globe to Southeast Asia, to Myanmar. Just as we've warned people, you and I, Angela, we've been talking about this since the military took over in Myanmar, when they ousted the U.S. client regime headed by Aung San Suu Kyi and her National League for Democracy. We said this is going to go the way of Libya. The U.S. is not going to accept that. They're going to keep inching it towards what would appear to be a civil war, but it's really a proxy war. And so here is the so-called national unity governments, the fake parallel government that the ousted U.S. client regime created, that is trying to get recognition from the United States and the UN, just like the opposition in Libya and Syria did or tried to do, just like Juan Guaido in Venezuela did. He was walking around with his own presidential podium, giving speeches, and then taking it and running away before he gets arrested. So this is Myanmar's shadow government declares resistance war against military junta. This is from Myanmar Now. This is opposition media. This is funded by the U.S. government through the National Endowment for Democracy. And we'll put the link to the whole speech. There's English subtitles. And he's basically saying the national unity government is running these so-called People's Defense Forces. And you and I, Angela, have talked about all of the atrocities and violence that these so-called People's Defense Forces have been carrying out. As a matter of fact, So that's who he's calling on to rise up, and the ethnic armed groups that the U.S. and British have been backing for decades in Myanmar, they're all being called on to wage war against their own country. This is in the middle of the COVID-19 pandemic and the global economic crisis that it has created, and now they're doing this. So before we dig into this further, Angela, is this the move of a government or an aspiring government that has Myanmar's best interests at heart?
No, absolutely not. I think you and I, we agree that from the day that any political parties start taking foreign money, it's not legitimate. This movement led by Aung San Suu Kyi, she's been co-opted by Western government a long time ago. It's been over 20 years, and Myanmar has never been decolonized. What they did when the British left, they planted the seeds for color revolution. So it was under sanctions. Myanmar has been under sanctions forever. So what they did was to loosen up. When they were dealing with the IMF, the what we call the banksters, the banker gangsters, and also they had to do some reforms in terms of democratization, just to please the U.S. and the Western powers. But when we say the democratization, it's a democracy that would go on the direction where the Western powers want. So here we have NUG, which is a replica of Juan Guaido. What is just trying to delegitimate the present government in Myanmar, then sanctions, blocking funds. It's just a replica. You can mirror Venezuela's situation. It's exactly the same. So they are going to strangle, to choke Myanmar's economy. That's the next step.
Yes, and just so people know, you're not making this up. This is the U.S. government's National Endowment for Democracy, and this is a colossal list of programs the U.S. government is funding inside of Myanmar. Again, the link is going to be in the video description below. And people who doubt that the U.S. is interfering in Myanmar's internal political affairs, I'm scrolling down this as I'm talking. I'm not going to run out of the list anytime soon. Look at these programs and tell me, how is this not political interference? How is this not a violation of the UN Charter? Everything to do with every political and social aspect of Myanmar's internal political affairs. There is a US government-funded program interfering in it. And the US would never tolerate another country doing this to them. And yet this is what they're openly doing to Myanmar. And I'm still scrolling. I'm done, and I'm still scrolling. I'm done with my bit on NED. And then here is Dr. Sasa, whose patron is the British royal family. So the former colonial rulers of Myanmar when it was called Burma. This is who his patron is. And I think he even says it in this Mother Jones article. And here he is, Myanmar opposition leader, we need more help from Biden to defeat the military junta. So this is him openly asking the United States to recognize this fake government that the US basically created in the first place, to recognize them officially. He's saying that it'll help free up funds. They could use those funds to pay people, different people, to probably buy weapons. And also, he doesn't say this, but obviously they want weapons from the US and military support as well. And again, this is the exact same thing they did in Libya and Syria. This is what Juan Guaido was trying to do in Venezuela. And here, there's this one. Wendy Sherman, the Deputy Secretary of State. This is her talking to Zin Mar Aung, and this is them talking about getting Burma back on the path to democracy. And who is Zin Mar Aung? Again, for people who think we're making this up, she is the Minister of Foreign Affairs of this fake government, the parallel government in Myanmar. She has her own webpage on the National Endowment for Democracy's website because she's an NED fellow. And it even says down here that she has this Yangon School of Political Science, and it's an NED-funded institution that they say it educates young activists in the values of democracy. No, it doesn't. And we talk about this all the time, how democracy in the West is a system of control because corporations run everything and they just want to give people the illusion that they have some sort of say. And then when they're doing democracy promotion overseas, like in Myanmar, this is extending that system of control over Myanmar. This is just empire, it's administrative network, and it expanding globally. And so people say the military overthrew an elected government. No, they didn't. That government is a product of foreign interference, not of any sort of actual democratic process. People say they beat the military in an election. That's true. But as you see on the NED's website, look at all these programs. This was them dumping millions and millions of dollars into the electoral process in Myanmar every single year. Let's backtrack a little bit. We'll just do this real quick because we've touched on this before. You remember the story of the People's Defense Forces going on trains and killing rail police. This is not them defending anyone. These are death squads killing anyone in uniform working for Myanmar's current government. And let me just get the quote right here. The guy who was part of this attack killing railway police, he says, since the coup, the regime has mobilized all forces under its command to help crush the resistance. That means that anyone in uniform who continues to work for the junta, including traffic police, firefighters, and even Red Cross workers, is fair game. This is a member of the People's Defense Force saying this. And we remember this guy was working with the police to help catch people burning down Chinese factories, so they murdered him. Has nothing to do with defending the people. This is killing people. And we remember this: as spat of killings continue, anti-junta forces warn of more to come. And this was about the People's Defense Forces in Mandalay admitting that they were attacking schools. And then the last one from Reuters, just in case you don't know what Myanmar Now is or don't trust it, here's Reuters, mainstream Western media: boycott and bombings mar Myanmar's new school year. And they say here, teachers were also afraid. Some teachers go to school in normal clothing and change in their uniform only inside the school. And we just read from the People's Defense Forces that they themselves said anyone in uniform is fair game, including Red Cross workers, so also obviously teachers. Angela, you have any other thoughts on this war that the National Unity Government has declared on their own country, and them begging the U.S. to recognize them? I mean, do you want to change what you said, months ago when we agreed that this was Libya all over again?
No, absolutely. It's the same playbook. The step by step. It's about trying to create a momentum. There's also R2P, responsibility to protect. We've seen it all over again. They're asking for an intervention. I just want to add more things related to the financing of NGOs, the meddling in Myanmar's politics. There was a $42 million there was from USAID that was supposed to go for humanitarian works, and it's been transferred to the civil society. So basically, to fueling more this civil war. It's also I just noticed, it's just funny how we see that they're still calling Myanmar Burma. And for people from Myanmar, it's very insulting, because when you call Myanmar Burma, Burma is the colonial name. And so you see, those are small details, but it shows people how much they see Myanmar as still as a colony. So it's modern colonialism. It used to be, we've said it all over, it used to be exporting civilization. Now it's exporting different things, but it's the same. It's the same evil power, hegemonic power. We are going to export democracy. We are going to control the media. We are going to control the NGOs. We are going to pour millions and millions of dollars. And in case it doesn't go the directions we want, then we are going to overthrow the government. That's how it is. That's how it is. It's a fake democracy. And again, we've said it over again, all over again. It's democracy is a process of self-determination. If there's no sovereignty, there's no democracy. That's it.
Yes, exactly. And failing regime change in Myanmar, especially, they would be more than happy to just destroy the country and create a failed state there, because it's right on China's border. The Chinese Belt and Road Initiative passes through Myanmar. It is an essential route for hydrocarbons to bypass the Strait of Malacca. We've talked about this many times, and we're going to get into that for our main topic, which is all about Taiwan again. China is developing the Belt and Road Initiative to kind of diversify the way goods and people travel and go into China and out of China. And so just destroying Myanmar would completely cut Myanmar off as an alternative route. And this would further kind of isolate China, which is the whole point. So the U.S. is doing this in Myanmar. They've got U.S.-backed protests here in Thailand. Same thing, extremely anti-China. They're against every sort of dealing the current government has with China. They want to overthrow the government. They want to put an anti-China government into power. They're doing the same thing in Malaysia. They had been trying to do the same thing in Cambodia, but it looks like they've uprooted it. They would if they could in Laos. The Philippines has a very loud anti-China opposition that really dislikes the current government, because it makes concessions with the U.S., but it is still very protective of the very large and growing relationship the Philippines has with China. And we're going to talk about, this goes right into our main topic, Taiwan. Taiwan, which is actually part of China, and almost every country on earth recognizes Taiwan as part of China under the One China policy, including the United States. The United States does not, for example, have an embassy in Taiwan. They have the American Institute, de facto embassy. So, and de facto, because while the US recognizes the One China policy, they do not actually put that into practice. They undermine that policy by de facto recognizing Taiwan as an independent country. Okay, so before we jump into this, we're going to break this up into a couple of parts. So we're going to talk about Taiwan's relationship with the U.S. and China. But anything about the One China policy that you want to add in here first, Angelo?
Well, the One China, I think it's important to just to look first at the Taiwan Constitution. Taiwan Constitution, it says clearly that Taiwan is part of China. So the thing is that if they wanted to declare independence, they would have to actually change the Constitution. Now, remember that Taiwan was dropped by the U.S. already in 1972. They actually used what they did back then was to use China to put China on the side of the U.S. against the USSR. So they dropped Taiwan back then. So it's they should learn from that experience. Taiwanese should learn from that experience. They were used before, and they might drop them again. Use them again now, and drop them again in the future. So and when it comes to Taiwan's politics, it's the same thing. You had the Sunflower Movement in 2016. The meddling, the funding, the U.S. funding into Myanmar's politics is massive. DPP is an anomaly. The DPP is the party of the president Tsai Ing-wen, which is pro-independence. It's leaning for independence, and it is completely hijacked by the US. So you have a multitude of NGOs. And if you follow the Sunflower Movement in 2016, you will see it's exactly the same playbook as what we saw in Hong Kong in 2019.
Yeah, so that's a great place to start, because I wanted to talk about the National Endowment for Democracy. We were just showing how extensive their meddling was in Myanmar. They're the same ones funding the core organizations driving the protests here in Thailand. And here is their entry on their website for the Taiwan Foundation for Democracy. So Taiwan is basically a nexus of US meddling in the entire region. It's such a nexus that they've established kind of like a franchise there. Instead of the NED just funding fake fronts in Taiwan, they set up a hub there called the Taiwan Foundation for Democracy. And if you go to their website, and this is one of the links that you sent, Angelo, you can see how they're meddling exactly as the NED does. So it's like a subsidiary of the NED, and it's operating on the island, in Taiwan. And so when we see the Global Times, this is Chinese state media, and they're talking about the DPP, which you were just talking about, this pro-independence party that currently runs the government there, collusion with hostile US NGOs, open as ever. Yes, absolutely. They've got their own franchise operating in Taiwan. And then there was articles like this: Chinese Communist Party mouthpiece accuses Taiwan's ruling party of meddling in Hong Kong affairs. Yes, absolutely. Just go to the Taiwan Foundation for Democracy's own website. They're admittedly pumping money into all of these pro-West, anti-China groups all across the region, including in Hong Kong. And let's go through these real quick, because then I want to hear a little more from you, Angelo, about how that works. So Hong Kong halts Taipei office, slams support of rioters. Hong Kong will no longer be a safe haven for secession. It's collusion. So again, state media from China. But then there's things like this, and this is what you were just talking about. Inside Taiwan's Sunflower Movement, 24 days in a student-occupied parliament and the future of the region. And when you look at the extract, they're talking about how Taiwan was drifting closer and closer to the mainland. And we're going to talk about that in just a moment, and how it looked very bleak for the pro-independence movement, and then by extension for the US and all of its plans and schemes in the region. And so what was the Sunflower Movement? It's the same as every other US-sponsored color revolution. They wanted to reassert the control of the country, or in this case, Taiwan, this territory, and they wanted a pro-US, basically a client regime in power there to steer it back towards anti-China, pro-independence. And that's what they did. And then this directly leaked, kind of spread like a disease into Hong Kong. And then now they're calling it the Milk Tea Alliance, and it stretches all over Asia. So Angela, can you give us some insight into that?
There's some very interesting things when it comes to Taiwan's politics, and especially how corrupted is the DPP and how they manipulate the democracy. I will give you some just a few examples. In 2004, there was supposedly a murder attempt to Chen Shui-bian, who was from the DPP, and so because of that, there was he got more vote because of there was a vote of compassion. Many people, and that happened just one day before the election. So you see the timing, and he got elected. He was not the favorite candidate. He got elected, and this was in 2004. Then you got in 2016, what we got? We got Sunflower Movement just right then, and then she got elected. Tsai Ing-wen got elected. 2020, what happens that DPP got elected, but because in 2019 there was a riot in Hong Kong, so Tsai Ing-wen from the DPP, she went from 35% of support to 55%, winning by 55%. So basically, a jump within 6 months, a jump of 20%. She was never supposed to win. Why did she win? Because the DPP is supported financially, and the rioters in Hong Kong. So you see, it's all a farce. I'm just adding one more thing. She's Tsai Ing-wen. There's a scandal when it comes to her PhD. She's never received a PhD, and now they're trying to falsify. So now they're exposing. They're going to court, and so far she's lost. She's lost. So she's just a farce. And when you look at the Taiwan politics, it's just very chaotic. It's just like people fighting in the what they call it the National Council. They call it the Legislative Yuan. That's the name of the council.
Okay, so that's the next thing we were going to go into. So the U.S. is backing the current government, and this notion of being pro-independence, and we're going to get into why an independent Taiwan, it makes no sense at all, and how detrimental it is to Taiwan's best interests. No matter who you are in Taiwan, it's detrimental to your interests. And so the next thing I kind of want to talk about is, you have mainland China, and you see all the progress, and you see how organized and orderly the government is there. And then across the strait, you have Taiwan, this Western style so-called democracy, and it's a basket case. And you were just talking about the allegations that she forged her academic credentials, and you sent me a Global Times article, which I think does a pretty good job kind of fairly laying it out. But I thought the Diplomat, which is a Western source, I thought even though they tried to paint it in a more flattering light, when you read through this, you see what a basket case Taiwan politics actually is. It's so ridiculous. It's so childish. And you have to ask yourself, how much time, energy, and resources are wasted in them going through all of this, constantly fighting with each other, instead of just running the territory and delivering for the people. So this is the Global Times article. All the links will be in the video description so people can compare and contrast. And this is from the BBC. Taiwan's brawling in parliament is a political way of life. And again, could you imagine, Angelo, seeing this on the mainland if they were talking about, extending the high-speed rail line, and they were all punching each other and climbing over tables and throwing chairs? I mean, when people see this, does this inspire confidence in Taiwan? And again, this is an added distraction. Running a country, a territory, a city is serious business. People's daily lives depend on it. And when you see this childish nonsense, really, in the halls of what's supposed to be a government, what kind of confidence does this inspire? And even the BBC has to concede how absurd it is. And they try to spin it off as if it's unique. It's unique, it's vibrant. They even say down here, Taiwan has a vibrant democracy. It's a basket case. And Angela, anything else you want to add about Taiwan politics and this basket case so-called democracy?
Well, there's a name for that. It's not democracy, it's demo-crazy. It's demo-crazy.
Yeah. Yes.
It's just, this showmanship. It's just this whole populism, and actually what is happening in Taiwan, because they're changing government from Kuomintang to DPP back and forth, nothing will happen. Why? Because you do and you undo. It's the same as what happened in the US. Trump gone, they are undoing what he did, and when Biden will be gone, it's going to be the same thing. So it's been stagnant. If you look at the GDP growth in Taiwan, it used to be like they used to call it one of the tigers, Asian tigers. Not anymore. It's been stagnant for the last 10 years, and it's cutting its own wrists because of the tension it's creating between the mainland and Taiwan. The mainland Chinese used to be the largest tourist crowd in Taiwan, and because of the tensions, no more mainland Chinese are allowed to go to Taiwan. So it's just cutting its own wrists. It's just ridiculous.
That's a really good point to make, because here in Bangkok, we see the Taiwan independence flag waving because that's part of the Milk Tea Alliance. It's a U.S. State Department project. They're all encouraged to help support the other U.S.-backed regime change operations going on all over the region. And this is a warning to people all over the region that when you pick the U.S., this is what's going to happen to you. When you sabotage your relationship with China, a growing superpower in the region, and driving all of this economic progress, this is what's going to happen to you. No more tourists are going to come. No one else can replace that number of tourists, not for Taiwan, not for Southeast Asia, and also the trade. No one can replace the trade that goes on with China, not the US, not Europe, not the US and Europe combined. We're actually going to take a look at that. You perfectly sprung us into the next part of this. Let's look at this. We do this pretty often. We look at the Atlas of Economic Complexity from Harvard University. Where did Taiwan export to in 2019? This is where companies operating in Taiwan are selling their products and making their money. Look at China. Look at this big rectangle here and how it would easily fit over the United States, Europe, Australia, and everywhere else combined. This is how big the export market is for Taiwan in China. And then there's Hong Kong, which you have to add to China because Hong Kong is part of China. And so you see, and take special note of Japan, little Japan over here. And Angela, you've talked about this in previous conversations about Taiwan, how Japan had colonized Taiwan and how they still have these aspirations of having influence over Taiwan again sometime in the future. Look at Japan here. So it's a very clear picture economically. And then let's look at imports. Okay, so also China is by far, when you look at imports and exports, China, the mainland is Taiwan's most significant and important trade partner. Anything else you want to add about trade and because actually there's a couple of things here I want to talk about. Actually, maybe you could give us some insight on this. The expat community, if you want to call it that, the people from Taiwan living in mainland China, there's a 23 million people in Taiwan. Over 1 million of them live on the mainland. That is a huge number, Angela. You want to talk a little bit about that expat community?
Well, it's 1 million of highly educated people from Taiwan going to the mainland. So all the brains, because remember all the largest Taiwanese factories, they moved to Taiwan, and with those factories, all the engineers and all the staff, they moved along. So it's 1 million people that actually they could be voters. If they were to vote, they would be voting for the traditional party, which is the Kuomintang, which is more into protecting the one China policy. So there's the estimate is probably only 100,000. They go back to Taiwan, especially for voting. So it's a pity. If they were allowed to vote by mail, you could be sure that it would be a big challenge for the DPP, because they would.
Angela, why aren't they allowed to vote by mail? Is that recent? Is that something recent that they've done to try to prevent this voting bloc from having any sort of say, or is that kind of like just something that has always been, and it just conveniently serves the interests of the current ruling government there?
I wouldn't jump into this. I don't have the details, but I don't know. I mean, probably if they were to vote, you could imagine like DPP to vote against Taiwanese in the mainland to vote by distance, because it would be big loss for the DPP.
Yeah, so that's something for us to look into. The next thing I want to show is this is from the government in Taiwan talking about cross-strait relations, and you can see the trade, how it's been steadily growing, and this corresponds to this. And if we were to go back to like 1998, I mean, you would see a totally different story. This is 1998. The export market. Look how big and important the U.S. was for Taiwan versus now, and so we always talk about Taiwan and how the U.S. is always warning of an imminent Chinese invasion, and we say how silly that would be for China to do that, because the integration of Taiwan back, the reunification of Taiwan back with the mainland is happening economically. We could see it right in front of our eyes, and even the Taiwan government itself has to admit that this is taking place. Look at this. And then we were talking about tourism, and you can see how politics, self-inflicted economic wounds by the current government, this pro-independence government, how that has impacted tourism and how it impacts the economy. There was one other thing that you sent this story as well, Angelo, about a tunnel, kind of like the Channel Tunnel connecting France and the UK, but this would be the largest, longest tunnel ever built, connecting the mainland to Taiwan, and this would benefit everybody on both sides of the strait, obviously. And again, it's something that China has already figured out how they're going to do it. They're prepared to build it, and the only thing obstructing it is politics in Taiwan, the basket case politics and pro-independence politics backed by the U.S. In Taiwan. What do you think about that, Angelo?
Yes, there was also a bridge between Jinmen Island and mainland China. Actually, many people don't know, but Taiwan is much closer geographically to the mainland, because there are some islands that are only 5 kilometers away. Those are the Jinmen Islands, and they had a project of a bridge between Jinmen Islands to the mainland, and it's actually half finished. It's been they stopped the this project. Also, one thing which is related to the sunflower movement, actually one of the reasons they had this movement was because back then there was a cross-strait service trade agreement, CSSTA. It was to be signed between the mainland China and Taiwan, and this would have benefited a lot Taiwan. You saw the figures in 2019 of the trade between Taiwan and China. The trade would be much bigger if there would be Chinese tourists would be allowed to go to Taiwan, and also if they had this cross-trade service trade agreement between Taiwan and China.
And I mean, it seems like a very obvious answer to this question, but I'll ask it anyway. I mean, the current government in Taiwan, I mean, when they're explaining this to the public, do they explain how they're going to replace all of the trade that they do with China, all of the tourism they get from the mainland? Do they explain where they're going to find alternatives for all of this? Do they have an alternative, even if it's completely ridiculous and rooted in fantasy? Do they say like, well, we're working on this deal with the US or with the EU or something? Do they or not?
Well, they've been selling the idea of Taiwanese identity, and actually, if you look at history, Taiwan, the population, the majority of the population of Taiwan, from the Civil War, the Kuomintang that fled the mainland to Taiwan, so they have roots. I mean, direct roots with the mainland. The locals, you have indigenous people in the south. But most of them, they are recent immigrants from the mainland. What happens is that it takes one generation to brainwash people. So you have the divide. If you look at the background of voters in the DPP, they are all young people with I would say limited knowledge of history. They see themselves as being Taiwanese. While when I was living in Taiwan 25 years ago, they would say they were Chinese. The identity was Chinese. So it took them one generation. And I would draw a parallel also with Hong Kong. It's the same. The Hong Kong people, the older generation, they've been living under occupation, and they know what it means. The younger generation, they idealize the colonial times. So remember, keep in mind, what is Taiwan has never been independent. I mean, it was occupied. I'm not sure about over around 100 years or 50 years by the Japanese. And there was during the Civil War. It was when the Japanese actually had invaded part of the northern China. So you see, I mean, and they're trying to idealize this partnership with Japan, which is ridiculous. And actually, they have problems. There, some islands they are claimed not only by China and Japan, but also Taiwan. So you see, even in the region, it's problematic. There are some tensions, but the problem is that really, like this identity thing, and this identity thing, or those concept of freedom, democracy, and so on, doesn't feed you. It's just this whole brainwashing. At the end of the day, people, what they should focus on is practical, tangible things. It's how much you can put on your plate. Is your lifestyle better than last year? Do your kids have access to education? Those are the important things, not this intangible concept of freedom. Because if you go to the mainland China, people are free. If you go to Hong Kong, people are free. It's just it's not very practical. What the way they're thinking.
And that's a good point. And one thing I was reading when I was looking at the articles you sent about the president and her allegedly forged academic credentials, she had two options, file a civil lawsuit against the people saying this, or there was actually a law where it's a criminal charge. You could go to jail for just saying something, right? And actually, people may or may not realize this, but a lot of countries around the world have criminal defamation laws. And the US and the UK, they're always saying, you know, these countries don't have free speech, the ones they want to pick on. But then they never mention that Taiwan also has laws like this, and that she could put people in jail for saying something for, you know, it's not true. And, you know, defamation is not, I don't really think that it's free speech, but it just shows the hypocrisy. But the main point you were just making is how irrational this notion of independence is, how it's so obvious that Taiwan's fate is entwined with China. It always has been. It was always a part of China. It will eventually become a part of China again, you know, reintegrated fully. And I like to say that Hong Kong was like a little mini version of Taiwan, where the West got this foothold and they fought tooth and nail to keep it. Even after the British handed Hong Kong back over officially, they were still fighting tooth and nail to keep it as a foothold of influence within Chinese territory. They're doing the exact same thing with Taiwan, only on a much larger scale. So we saw the Sunflower Revolution in Taiwan, and we saw the mobs in Hong Kong. China uprooting that in Hong Kong is a small version of what they're eventually going to do to Taiwan. And I think China knows this. And I think the reason they've been so, you know, they want to show their intentions to people in Taiwan that this isn't going to be an invasion. This isn't what the US is saying it is. We're going to take care of you, just like they're taking care of Hong Kong. And think about it, the so-called pro-democracy protesters, these violent mobs were destroying the city, and now it was China that restored order, peace, and prosperity to it. The same goes for Taiwan. When you see what a basket case the politics are in that country, and the irrational policies that they're pursuing at the expense of their economy, that is something that will end as Taiwan becomes further integrated with the mainland. Now, one of the things that could spoil this, Angela, was there something you wanted to add to that?
I'd like to add something which is really important. The one country to system that you have in Hong Kong was actually an experiment. What China wanted to do was to show Taiwan and show the world that one country to system was working, could work. So they wanted to propose the same for Taiwan. And actually, even they would go further to say, well, you would have one country to system. Additional to that, you could have your armed forces. You know, you could keep your armed forces. So basically, it's more like a concept of pride, integration of Taiwan, but it's a matter of faith. I think it's important to understand how Chinese they see the power. People need to understand the history of China and the pride of Chinese. It's been humiliated for 100 years. Taiwan is the last piece to end this huge humiliation that China had been facing. And they want it back, but they want it back not, you know, they'd be fine with the decentralized system. The status quo is just about, okay, you know, let's agree that you are part of us and let's work together, let's trade together. It's very pragmatic. It's trade. Let's do business together, and you stop having foreign meddling to Taiwan. You know, we are brothers. And again, if you follow the speech of Xi Jinping says clearly, Chinese don't fight Chinese. You know, and in that speech, he was never related. You know, you wouldn't see in Western media, but it's very clear. China doesn't want to fight Taiwan. And again, you know, it's funny, like for Chinese, I mean, Westerners, they say, well, China might invade Taiwan. But, you know, how can you invade your own territory? You know, I mean, Taiwan, again, you cannot invade your own territory. And there's one more thing that I want to add is something interesting. A couple of months ago, there's a retired general in Taiwan, and he actually said that if China was to attack Taiwan, that Taiwan army should depose arms and should overthrow the DPP. And he's from the older generation. He knows that first of all, you never fight a war that you cannot win. I mean, just be pragmatic. Does it make sense? You know, China could take back Taiwan really quickly, but why would it do that? For time for China, time is on the side of China. What China wants is a status quo. China is fine with the status quo, but the problem is that, and we're going to see this with the Rand paper, just in a minute, is what happens that timing. The US is under pressure because there's only a window of opportunity where you can fight China. After that, it's over. That's the paper.
I think we've talked about this, and I think we've agreed, and I've talked to other people about this, how what I always fear is that the US, when they're sitting around the table thinking about what they're going to do with China and how it's about to surpass the West and how centuries of Western hegemony over the planet are coming to an end. Fighting with China now, sooner than later, is the best option, because in 10 years' time, maybe not they can win now, but in 10 years' time, there's no way they're going to win. And this is war with China, thinking through the unthinkable. But I don't think that it's unthinkable, not for the United States. They're gearing up for this right now. And we're going to actually do a whole episode on this, and we're going to bookmark it and pull out quotes and everything. So I'll just give a real brief overview. They admit that, say, sometime around 2015, the US would have a much larger advantage over China. Come 2025, no, they're not going to. And when you look at all of the vulnerabilities that US planners have identified, things like hydrocarbon transport to China, to its economy, you could see how China understands that this is a vulnerability and how they've tried to diversify this. Just like we were talking about earlier about Myanmar, they want to cut Myanmar. The US wants to destabilize and destroy Myanmar. Maybe they don't even care about getting a client regime into power. Just cutting that off for China puts them in a greater position to fight this war that they're talking about, over 100 pages about how they're going to wage this war, and how the thing that I found, and I want to hear your take on this also. The thing that I found amazing about this report is how candid they are about how China, all of its military is in China, and as if that's like a stupid. Why are they so stupid? Why don't they spread out like we have? And they also admit that China doesn't have any conventional means of credibly threatening the U.S. homeland. And then when you look at all the possible scenarios here about how a war would actually start, they talk about Taiwan several times, and it's always about the U.S. being there and some conflict being provoked out of the malign U.S. military presence in the region across the ocean from where the U.S. is actually located on the map. Angelo, anything? When you were reading through this, what struck you about this report?
What I think it's one of the best papers, and it's so transparent, really. What worries me the most, what worries me the most is the position that Japan and Korea would take. Look at because we talk about army bases. If you want to attack China, you need to be close. What are the closest army bases? It's Korea, South Korea, and Japan, and Australia is way too far. So now, if they were to launch attacks from Japan and Korea, it would be de facto a declaration of war. Would Japan and Korea take the risk to allow an attack from their territory? It would be a suicide. So if they don't cooperate, there's no way that they can touch China. And I think the most probable scenario would be either a force flag operation, and we've seen this through history, the Gulf of Tonkin. I mean, many times just that was the way to start a war. Another way is just a blockade. The most worrying, I think, for China is the Strait of Malacca, and this is one of the reasons that China has been investing so much into the Belt and Road Initiative, because 40% of China's trade, not even China's trade, the Southeast Asia's trade is going to the Strait of Malacca. And this is why actually there was a project that you remember in Thailand, the Kra Canal. The Kra Canal was a good way just to bypass the the Malacca Straits. So other ways are just the Pakistan corridor and other inland routes, but it's not ready yet, and
And
yeah.
they're all under attack. I mean, the corridor going through Xinjiang, under attack by US-backed violent separatists. Through Pakistan, west of the Indus River, by Baluch separatists that the US has openly backed. There are US Congress resolutions about trying to recognize Baluchistan as an independent country, which would just cut off China's access through Pakistan. And we were just talking about in Myanmar, the high-speed rail here in Thailand is always up in the air because if an anti-China US-backed opposition gets into power, that's done. The opposition in Malaysia, the NED, was bragging about how that was one of the first things that they canceled when the NED helped them get into power in 2018. And so, continue, Angela. I didn't mean to, because I don't want to go off on a tangent.
We've covered this over and over, this whole containment of China and the end goal. I mean, when you see this paper, it seems so obvious that the US is under pressure to start a war to contain China. And the question is it going to be a blitzkrieg? I mean, there are many scenarios possible. Is it going to be like a short war, or is it going to be a much longer one? But China, to be honest, China is not in a good position, just because geographically, it's encircled. If you look at the map, China is encircled by U.S. army bases all around China. It's already encircled, and so you can imagine many fronts. And then there's a question mark: is what would be the position of Russia? Would Russia come to help China? That's a question mark. But keep in mind that, again, look at history. Alliances changes. There was an agreement, remember, between Hitler and the Russian, was a Molotov-Ribbentrop, was it, or an agreement of non-aggression agreement between.
Yeah, how did that turn out for Germany? Not too well.
So you could imagine shift that this is worrying. Again, I think country ultimately decide who's about to win. You don't want to be in the clan of losers. So it's going to be about the momentum. Whoever has the upper hand, then you might see a shift. But then again, it just doesn't make sense. The US needs enough support. NATO countries, are they willing to join this US madness? Does it make sense for Europeans, which are so far from China and have absolutely no threat? Does it make sense to join this madness?
And actually, one of the things that worries me about this report is that they're not really focused on defeating China. They're focused on how much economic damage the war would cost, and so would cause. And so that I think is what they would try to do. They would wage the war. They wouldn't care whether they won or lost, just as long as they wrecked China more economically than the US and its allies. And I think right now, as things are on the map, the US has a greater capacity. It's always easier to destroy than to build. And I think this is what they're thinking. And so we're definitely going to come back to this paper. In the video description below, we will have some of these statistics about how Taiwan's military stacks up to the mainland. It doesn't even come close. And then I wanted to talk about this. I think this is what we'll end on. Taiwan, this is from the Global Times, again, Chinese state media. Taiwan fears becoming the next chess piece that the US casts away following Vietnam, Afghanistan, local media. So that's one headline. Then there's another one. Why the US will abandon island of Taiwan eventually, Global Times editorial. And then there was this ABC Australia piece, and I think this is a fair reflection of just the Western media in general, how they look at it. I'm gonna play this clip. Let's listen to it, and then we'll talk about this on the other side.
Thing about Afghanistan and China, you don't usually think of them as neighbours. but they are, thanks to Afghanistan's ownership of a 300-kilometre-long river valley to their far east. The countries share a tiny little 90-kilometre border up in the mountains. China has been watching the withdrawal of US and allied forces from Kabul very closely, looking for how they can use it to their advantage. And they have a lot of options on that front. For one thing, Beijing has been using it for propaganda purposes.
The rapid Taliban takeover of Afghanistan and the American troop withdrawal, China's government-backed Global Times newspaper is suggesting Taiwan could suffer the same fate as Afghanistan. The newspaper editorial described the U.S. as an unreliable partner.
So they're basically saying they've been drawing a lot of comparisons between what's happening in Kabul and what happened in Saigon in the 70s, and saying that Taipei will be next. This has forced the US to reaffirm its support for Taiwan, and the Taiwanese Premier Su Tseng-Chang to declare that they are confident in US support.
We aren't afraid of being killed or locked up. We will absolutely protect our country and defend this land. The US, Japan, and countries nearby all have expressed that they care for Taiwan and they deeply value peace and stability in the Taiwan Strait.
Okay, so we were talking about this clip before the show, and we were saying if you're the premier of a country and you're talking about how you're not afraid of being killed or captured, I mean, something is very wrong with your foreign policy approach. And so that ABC segment was talking about the Global Times headlines that we were just showing. And just the thing that struck me, and then let me know what you think, Angelo. The thing that struck me was when the premier was saying how the US and Japan and other countries in the region have their back. No learning has occurred at all. He just watched the US completely stab Afghanistan in the back. Withdraw everything that they supposedly built, a house of cards, just like Taiwan, just like their so-called democracy. It's a house of cards. And everything collapsed. And they left all those people behind at the airport. They couldn't care less about them. They don't care about Afghanistan's future. They never did. The whole reconstruction process, we've talked about that, how they didn't care about reconstruction at all. It was a huge racket. And then when they left, they knew the government wasn't going to survive. And they're doing the exact same thing to Taiwan right now. And the premier is like, I think the US and Japan, they have they care about peace and stability in the region. It's just, it's so detached from reality. And if I was someone in Taiwan, I would feel kind of worried, extremely worried about my future. Angelo?
Well, think about Japanese. I mean, Japanese, while the war was already over, they received 2 nuclear bombs. I mean, just how can you trust those people? That, I mean, it's one of the biggest crimes against humanity. I mean, war was over. You know, the Japanese emperor wanted to capitulate. He wanted to stop the war because they lost already, and they still throw those 2 bombs. I think one of the problems when it comes to the U.S., and again, Americans are hostages of the military-industrial complex and the elites. You know, the elites are the ones that want to fight a war, not Americans. So they are the first victims. But when it comes to war, I think because the U.S. hasn't experienced a war in its own soil. You know, the only times it was attacked was Pearl Harbor, but you know, it's not tangible. The only contact that people have with war is through news and through Hollywood. So when people watch Hollywood, it's not tangible. So you don't see the suffering, and you see how they relate the news. You know how the Western medias, whenever they portray, you know, like the last news in Kabul airport, they were reporting only the American soldiers that died. For Western media, if they are not Americans, they're not human. You know, why? I mean, that's how they say it. That's how they say it, and that's how they report it. So sadly, I think if people had a different view when it comes to war, you know, something more tangible than what they see in Hollywood. You know, Hollywood is they tend to, I mean, they romanticize war. You know, it's always we are saving those countries and so on. But if they could just experience just for a minute the suffering of those people, Just
Yeah. And what you just said about Taiwan, I mean, what do you think is going on inside their minds? They see how little America, the media, the government, everyone involved in Afghanistan, how little they actually cared about the Afghan people, demonstrably in front of the entire world. They couldn't get out of there fast enough. They left all those people behind when they got blown up at the airport, just like you said. So when you're in Taiwan, you're in this pro-independence leaning government. What is going on inside their mind that convinces them that somehow the U.S. cares about them, even though they don't care about Afghans, Iraqis, Syrians, the Ukrainians whose country they've wrecked, Venezuela, where you are right now? You see how the sanctions are crippling different aspects of daily life. What makes people in Taiwan that think the U.S. is their ally and friend and is going to stand by them and not just use them as a battering ram against the mainland? What's going on inside their head? Do you know, or is this they're just so selfish and short-sighted? All they care about is the gains that they're making right now politically and financially.
Well, that's the information game. It's just this whole brainwashing, manufacturing consent. It's just when you are in clusters. When people don't travel, they don't, if they were just to go just for a short trip to China, their whole perspective would change completely. They will see that China, the way China is portrayed, is completely different from the reality. And then, when you live in a cluster, where you are brainwashed from morning till evening, look at Hollywood. I like to take the example of Hollywood because people learn about history through Hollywood. I mean, how ridiculous is that? So it's just about brainwashing, and you see, kids they buy into this whole thing about the West saving the world and bringing a new lifestyle, something which is it's sad because ultimately the West and the US doesn't care about Taiwan. Taiwan is just a pawn. It's a useful idiot, and what the US wants is to have other countries to fight their own wars. Look at the last wars. The last time the US really fought a war, it was in Vietnam, and it got badly beaten. So what it's doing now is having other countries to fight their wars, or they fund terrorists. This is, look at what in Syria. They were mercenaries. They have deep pockets, and they finance other people and countries to fight their own wars.
Yes, and so we were just talking about the U.S. and its planning for war with China, and we were talking about how Taiwan is a possible trigger in the South China Sea also. And I just want to show how all of these excuses, how farcical they are, how shallow and empty they are, and how it is just like you say, it's all propaganda. This is from the New York Times. This is from 2016. The title is "Tribunal Rejects Beijing's Claims in South China Sea." And so this was about some PR stunt that the U.S. organized on behalf of the Philippines. They got this court in The Hague to recognize the Philippines' claims. But if you look at this headline, also from 2016, Taiwan, after rejecting South China Sea decision, sends patrol ship. This is Taiwan rejecting the tribunal decision that the U.S. organized in favor of the Philippines. This shows you what a joke the South China Sea issue is. They have all of these overlapping disputes, and not just with China, but with each other. And even Taiwan has its own claims. And when the U.S. organized this tribunal in favor of the Philippines against, Beijing, it also ruled out the claims that everyone else in the region had over that, including Taiwan. And Taiwan complained and even sent a ship. So this is how tenuous the grounds are that the U.S. is using to create conflict and tensions with China. And this is the sort of thing that they talk about in that paper, triggering a war with China. And you could see how fake and empty this is. And I've always said, you saw the UK and France with what's a maritime dispute over fishing waters, and they worked it out. It didn't even come close to being a conflict. And it's the same thing with the South China Sea. The US is escalating it artificially into a conflict so they can trigger this war. And so I think the way I want to end this is by just saying US is racing against time, just like you say, Angelo. They want to fight China sooner than later. If they think that it's possible to at least set China back economically, even if they don't win the war, they can set China back, damage them severely economically. They will do that. And you can see every day, in every way, you could see it manifesting itself, this propaganda to demonize, dehumanize the Chinese people, China as a nation, the Chinese government, to create all of these false pretexts to create tensions and conflict with China, and using things like the South China Sea or Taiwan. We just saw how irrational Taiwanese independence is, how it serves no interest of the actual people living in Taiwan, how dependent Taiwan is on the mainland economically. It makes no sense at all. And you see China reaching out with bridges and tunnels. And what is the US reaching out with? Fake democracy that turns the country into a basket case, and weapons to go fight America's wars for them, just like you said, Angelo. And so this is what we have to do every day, and then with this show every week, and other people out there constantly trying to cut through the propaganda and warn people about this war that the US wants, and that they're getting people ready for. We need to cut through this propaganda and expose it. Angela, any last thoughts you want to share with us, especially on that topic?
No, I think you made all great points. Just to say, well, this is the reason we are here on YouTube, on this channel, just trying to inform people of what is going on, just the reality on the ground, and just because we don't want war. You have an experience. Both of us, we've been close to, 20, 25 years in the region. That's our home, and we're seeing this absurdity. So we're just hoping for the best, really.
Absolutely. You have family in Asia. I have family. I know people here. They're real human beings. These are real lives that are going to be destroyed. And for the US, even though the planners are fairly confident that China won't attack the US homeland, those will be US soldiers, sailors, Marines, airmen who die in this stupid conflict that the US is waging just to maintain their hegemony. Because they cannot find a constructive role to play among nations, they insist on imposing themselves upon all other nations. Those will be sons and daughters who never go back home, or if they do, they'll be deranged, ticking time bombs, just like all of the veterans returning from Afghanistan, Iraq, and everywhere else the US sends its military. So on that depressing note, and like I said, next week, maybe Venezuela, or maybe this Rand Corporation paper about US-China war, not just the conflict. We'll get into that. All the links that we've gone over are in the video description below. There are also links of where you can find Angelo on social media, so you can follow him. I'm not on social media, but you can follow, obviously my YouTube channel here, and I have newatlas.report. All of my work is there where you can follow it. Thank you for watching. And Angelo, as always, thank you for your expertise. I really appreciate that, and taking the time to join us. Bye for now.